Hey book nerds, welcome to my channel. So today I'm doing my May wrap up. It's actually on time for once. May was a great month for me in terms of reading. It's the first month since everything started that I feel like I kind of got back into the swing of reading. And that was mainly from doing a lot of rereads and also a little project that I set myself. So I actually read 15 books in May, which is good, really good. And 5 of those were rereads and 1 of those was an arc, which means my arc list is suffering, but my mental health is better, so that's always good. I also didn't rate any of these books below 3 stars, so I had 2 3-star reads, 3 3.5-star reads, 3 4-star reads, and 1 5-star read, and that's not including the rereads, so the 5-star read is a new read. I'm just going to go through them in the order I read them, as per usual, and talk about them. The first book I read was a reread, and it is Freshers by Tom, Ellen, and Lucy Ivison. Ivison? Yeah. This I read last year. This is a contemporary about 2 students who are just starting at university. They went to school together, they know each other, and she's always had a crush on him. He's never known she's existed, and basically they start at the same university, which is a York University. It's a fictional university, but it's based off York University. And it's kind of about their romance, their friendship, the people they meet along the way at university. It's a really good story. I obviously resonate with it a lot because I went to York University and I'm back at York University, so I have a personal attachment to it. Upon rereading it, it's probably not as good as I originally said it was. I would give this about a 4 stars now. I think I gave it a 4.5/5 stars last year. But it was a perfect book for me to kind of kick my month off with. It kind of got me in the mood for reading again. It's just a very easy, light read. I will link my video where I originally reviewed this down below because I'll probably talk about it in more detail there. And same for all the rereads. The next book I read was The Ark, and it was Gemma's Not Sure by Jill Stuart. This is another contemporary about a student. This is about a girl and a boy. He has gone off to university. She is in her final year of school. It is set in Scotland, and it's actually the second in the series, but I've not read the first book in the series, and you do not need to read the first book in the series. So the full review for this will be linked down below on my blog, as it is an arc. But this was really enjoyable. I gave this 3.5 stars. It's not as fluffy as I was expecting, which isn't a bad thing. It actually deals with quite a lot of issues. Nothing too heavy, but it does deal with kind of the expectations of parents and going to university and what that entails. And it was certainly a lot more serious in tone than I expected. I really enjoyed it. The characters were pretty good, they were pretty interesting. There are only a couple of things where obviously it was explained in the first book and it's not explained in the second book, but that was like a character. There was just one character. I had no idea who they really were or their relation to anyone else, but that was fine. You could kind of pick up at least the context of the character. It didn't really affect my enjoyment in any way. So yeah, I would definitely recommend this, and I don't want to read the first book in the series because the first book is about Gemma's friend, and Gemma's friend is not a nice character. I don't imagine I'd want to read a whole book from her point of view, but yeah, this one's basically about Gemma. She's struggling with some confidence issues, she's struggling with deciding what she wants to do with her life, and yeah, it was a decent contemporary. I'm glad I read it. The next book I read was The School for Good and Evil by Soman Chainani, I think is how you say it. This is a middle grade fantasy book. This is a hefty book though, and there are a lot in the series, let me tell you. I really enjoyed this. I gave this 4 stars. This is about these 2 girls. One is called Sophie and the other I think is called Agnes. I can't quite remember. But Sophie is the blonde one, and I'll call her Agnes for the purposes of this review. Agatha? I think it's Agatha. Yeah, Agatha. Anyway, she's the dark-haired one, and they live in this world where fairy tales are real. They're not like confirmed real, but they're assumed real. And every 4 years or so, 2 children get stolen from their town, and one gets sent to the school for good and one gets sent to the school for evil. School of Good trains them to be fairy tale heroes, and the School for Evil teaches them to be fairy tale villains. These two girls get chosen, but the pretty blonde one gets sent to the School for Villains, and the black, grim, emo-y one gets sent to the School for Heroes. And that's kind of all I'm going to say about the plot. It's sort of about their friendship, it's sort of about them. They assume initially that they've been sent to the wrong schools, and it's about them trying to... Agatha just wants to get home, whereas Sophie, the blonde one, wants to stay at the School for Good. As in, she wants to be transferred there from her evil school. She thinks that's where she really belongs. And this book was really good. There's some very valid criticisms of it. It does do some weird stuff with gender, and there's a running theme of ugly is evil and good is beautiful, and that's slightly problematic. I've seen some complaints about that, and I think they're all perfectly valid. They didn't personally bother me, but I will be interested to see in the rest of the series, which I am planning to read, what direction those themes go in. The reason I like this is it was so unique. There was a lot of cool concepts going on here. It was really dark as well. Like, I think this is middle grade, I'm pretty sure it is, but there's a lot of surprisingly dark stuff. My main complaint of the book is that, like I said, this is a book in a series, and it's a very long book. It's like 400 and something pages. And it felt like a long book. It wasn't like massive childish font or anything. It just felt long. And I feel like the climax of this book could have been pushed back a few books. I kind of wish that it had stayed on what this book was about for more of the series, because I don't really know what the rest of the series is about, but I thought that the conflict in this was interesting and I liked the direction it was going, and I think you could have had a lot more books on that conflict as opposed to what happened at the end. Seems like it should have been the end of the series. That sounds kind of weird to say, but yeah, I still really enjoyed this. This isn't going to be for everyone. Like I said, there's some weird stuff going on that's not necessarily good, but I thought it was really unique, and I was really invested in the story, which doesn't usually happen with fantasy, so that was really enjoyable. I'm glad I read this, and I'm surprised I liked it so much. The next book I read, I gave 4 stars, and that is Everything Grows by Aimee Herman. This book, as I always say, is one of my favourite covers of all time. This is a contemporary, it's a contemporary set in the 90s about I will say, a teenager who is kind of going through some stuff. I'm going to use she pronouns because that's what the book does, but essentially this teenager's, one of the things they're struggling with is her gender identity. So there's loads of hints that she is trans. The basic premise of this book is that this girl was bullied. She's not straight, and she was bullied by this guy at school, and then he kills himself, and as part of an English project she starts to write letters to him, kind of coping with her emotions and her feelings and all the mixed up teenage stuff, and also all the gender stuff and sexuality stuff she's struggling with. I really wanted to love this book more than I did. I think it's a good book. I think it's well written. I like the way it explores the themes, and I think it's good that books like this exist. It is very basic in its premise, which is allowed, but it didn't necessarily do a whole lot beyond it was basically a story of this person coming to terms with those things, and that's kind of all it is. And I don't think that enough, I don't know what it was, something was missing to take it that extra step for me. There was also a lot of coincidences in this story. Like, they don't normally bother me because you do have to have some, but they weren't particularly disguised very well, and I felt like that they were noticeable, and that was annoying as well, because combined with the kind of simplistic plot, it was like everything was just a bit too easy, and that's a problem for me. Having said that, I don't want to judge this book too harshly, A, because of the content, and B, because I did really enjoy it. Like I said, I gave it 4 stars. It was just after reading it that I thought more critically about it, and I think there are books that do what it does better. Having said that, I don't think you should not read it. It's a good book for June. and it does have some really interesting things to say. It's just that a lot of it is not as compelling as I hoped it would be. But yeah, it's a bit of a disappointment. Following that, we have my biggest surprise of the month, and that is The Gracier by Kim Liggett. This is the 5-star read, guys. I was not expecting this. This is a dystopian book. I can explain the plot much better now having read it. This girl lives in a society where it's like kind of like a smallish town, and in this society it is believed that when girls turn 16 they have magic, and that is literal magic. It's not some kind of metaphorical magic like I thought it was. It is actual magic, and they are sent away for their 16th year to live in the wilderness, just these girls, and kind of use up all their magic so then they can return to decent society. Basically, the girls, when they go out on their own, they are not nice to each other. There's several dangers they have to deal with, and they kind of have to, the main character is bullied already, and now she's stuck in the wilderness with her bullies. There's a lot of the elements here that I thought there would be, that I was really looking forward to. So there's a lot of intensity around the female friendships, there's a lot of viciousness, there's a lot of darkness in this. This is straight up horror at some points. Like, there was one thing it didn't do that I thought it was going to do that would have like perfected the horror, which sounds really weird, like I wanted more bad stuff to happen, but it did do a lot of dark stuff that I wasn't expecting, and that was cool. And the characterization was spot on. I was really invested. I didn't know where the story was going, which was really cool. I have a couple of gripes with this. It's still a 5-star read because I had such a strong kind of instantaneous love of it, and I was completely compelled by it. There is a romance element in this that I do not enjoy, and I'm not going to expand beyond that because it's too spoilery. But I was not a fan of that. I didn't think it was necessary. There's also something that happens at the very, very, very end that I was not a fan of, and again, can't talk about it, but I did not like how it ended. However, I loved this book. It was complete. It did everything I wanted it to, but I couldn't predict it, and that is such a skill. I really enjoy this author's writing. It instantly made me want to read all their other books. And yeah, I don't know if this book's going to be for everyone. I always kind of, my 5 stars are very personal to me, but it had, if you want a book that's like deliciously dark and focuses on like those uncomfortable situations where there's like a gang, it's basically, I hate to say Lord of the Flies, but Lord of the Flies with teenage girls is quite accurate for this book, and it was great. I loved it. It's awesome. There's a lot of ambiguity as well. I won't say whether there's actual kind of like the magic is presented as being fact within the society, but as a reader you are encouraged to doubt it, and it goes back and forth, and that's really cool. There's like some interesting elements, and I really like how that was all done. So yeah, really, really happy I read this book. I loved it. The next book I read was The Girlfriend by Michele Francis. This is one of my most, or one of the thrillers I really wanted to read this year. Sadly, I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It was okay. The main problem with this book is it's super long. I don't know why it didn't bother me as much as it should have, but this book's super long and not a ton happens in it for its length, which should have been a bigger problem than it was, but it actually wasn't, and it didn't feel like a slog to get through this book, which is why I've given it 3 stars, because I actually quite enjoyed it. This is about a woman she's really wealthy. Her son brings home a new girlfriend, and instantly they just take a disliking to each other. More specifically, the young girlfriend takes a disliking to the mother. You get chapters from both of their points of view. The girlfriend is a really unpleasant person. I was kind of thought this book would be more of ambiguous, so it's like they dislike each other and you don't really know whose side to be on, and you flip around. No, the girlfriend is just horrible. Like there's no way around it, and I think it was a shame because this book could have benefited from more ambiguity and more let's say a better use of the dual narrative to make you doubt what's actually happening. There's none of that really. It's kind of a standard story. It is still a thriller, and it's kind of about how the girlfriend kind of ruins the mother's and son's relationship, and then other stuff happens. There was a big surprise in this book, but it's not like a thrillery twist, it's just a surprising plot element. And yeah, I don't really know what else to say about this book. That's not a particularly glowing review, but I did enjoy it, and it's not like it was a bad book. But if you want like a really great thriller, this is not that book. The next book I read is another reread, and actually this one's interesting because it is Gerald's Game by Stephen King. I have long said that this is one of my favourite horror books. I have raved about it, and it's good, don't get me wrong, but I no longer think it's one of my favourites. I'd probably rank this like a 4-star out of 5. This is about a woman who gets handcuffed to a bed by her husband. They're on holiday, they're kind of like in a house in the middle of nowhere. And then she asks him to stop, and he won't, so she kicks him and he dies, and he's dead on the floor, she's handcuffed to a bed, there's no one around for miles and miles, and that's like the setup. The reason I really liked this book when I first read it is because it's one of the few books that has actually scared me, and I don't know why I decided to reread it now when I'm in isolation on my own, because the whole horror comes from this woman being stuck on her own. it was a poor choice in retrospect. But yeah, I read this and I still really enjoyed it. I still think it's well written. It's very Stephen King-esque. It's got a lot of his style and his tropes all over it, which isn't a bad thing. It's just, I think, something I notice a lot more now as a more experienced horror reader. It's still got some really great stuff in here. I should trigger warn this book for kind of everything, not everything, but definitely abuse, child abuse in particular, and parental abuse, not to spoil anything, but yeah. Also, it's a really graphic portion of this book, which I actually didn't reread. I knew it was coming, so I skipped it. So there's some graphic descriptions of, like, I guess you call it like body horror type stuff. But yeah, I'm glad I reread this book, and I'm glad I've got a more developed opinion on it, because it has been a few years since I read it, and I can kind of update that. So yeah, it might have been an odd choice for isolation, but I'm glad I read it. The final book I'm going to talk about in this video, which I will explain in a minute, but it is Straight On Till Morning. This is by Liz Braswell. Yes, Liz Braswell. It's one of the Twisted Tale Disney books. The lovely Soman from Meet Soman and I got me this book. Very glad she did. These are all essentially published fanfiction, but like official Disney fanfiction, where they take one element of a Disney story and they change it. So in this one, Peter Pan never came back for his shadow. Instead, Wendy reaches the age of 16 and then sells his shadow to Captain Hook so she can go to Neverland. That's kind of like the premise of this story. I did really enjoy this. I would give it 3.5 stars. There's weird stuff going on in this book, even for the Twisted Tale books. They're always a little bit weird, and that's why I love them. Firstly, this is the first book I read where I felt like the author didn't necessarily love Peter Pan, and not the character, just like the story there was just something missing that the other ones had, where I felt like, I don't know, she wasn't quite as passionate about having to write this. It felt like it wasn't necessarily her choice to pick this movie, which might be the case, it might not be, that's just the impression I got. Secondly, Wendy's now 16, and there's something really weird about an official Disney book where they keep mentioning that the pirates might rape Wendy, and they don't use that word, but they use a lot of euphemisms, and there's a lot of like suggestions that people will take advantage of her, and they say, like, at one point they refer to her maidenhood, and that's not a criticism, it's just super weird, and be aware of it, because these are marketed as kids books, and like, I'm not saying kids shouldn't read about that kind of stuff, but there's like, it's a bit odd, is all I'm saying. And the other odd thing is that this book tries so hard to be feminist. One thing I really like that it does is it fixes the whole Wendy Tinkerbell thing. The whole book, Peter Pan is barely in this book, it's basically Wendy and Tinkerbell's story, which I am all on board with. And this is mostly well done. There's just a couple of odd moments. So I don't know if you know the Bechdel test, which is the test that where the two on-screen female characters talk about something that is not a male character. Wendy doesn't refer to it by name, but at one point she talks to Tinkerbell and she's like, all we ever do is talk about Peter, let's not talk about Peter from now on, we're going to talk about something else. And it felt just a little bit too on the nose, like it was just a little too strong of a reference to that test. But yeah, I love this book so much. I really had a blast reading it. I still need to make my way through all of them, but I've read like four of them now, and each one is just so enjoyable and I love them so much, so that's great. And then I was in the mood to read Peter Pan stuff, so what I actually did is I reread Lost Boy by Christina Henry, and then I read all of Christina Henry's books. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a separate video talking about just Christina Henry's books. I'm going to rank them now I've read them all and talk about them in a lot more detail, but just so you're aware, I read those. So that's like Lost Boy, The Mermaid, Alice, Red Queen, Looking Glass, and Girl in Red. I think that's all of them, so that's like 5 of them. Some of those rereads, some of those I read for the first time. All of them are great because I love Christina Henry, and that's all I'm going to say about that for this video, so keep an eye out for the next one. But yeah, so that was my May. I hope you had a good May. I didn't mention it, but my mental health-a-thon readathon did not happen, as I'm sure you could tell from this video. I wanted it to just... I kind of did the spirit of mental health-a-thon because I read what I needed at the time, but yeah, I do love the readathon, so I'm sorry I didn't fully take a part in that. But yeah, let me know what you read in May. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give me a thumbs up, it helps me out massively, and I hope to see you next time.